right, thank you for tuning in. 23 minutes before 11 o'clock. Nice looking Wednesday. Drew Johnson is on the phone. He's an investigative reporter. He's a senior scholar at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance and the founder of the Council on Responsible Local Government. He served as the president of the Tennessee Center for Policy Research. He has appeared on Glenn Beck's program, which we carry, the Sean Hannity radio show, which we used to carry, the BBC, All Things Considered, Penn and Teller. He was on Penn and Teller.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. We got to find out more about
my favorite part.
that. Yeah.
I like Penn and Teller. I don't always agree with the politics of some of them, but the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer and a contributor to the Wall Street Journal, the National Review and Human Events. The hypocrisy of environmental groups and environmental hypocrisy is what we're talking about today. I might even be guilty of some of this hypocrisy because I find myself, you know, wanting to be the good little tree hugger. I'm not really a tree hugger, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Just a responsible, what do you call it? A good steward. Yeah. And then at the same time, you know, drive a car. Drew, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Where are you right now? Where are you calling from?
I'm actually in Las Vegas, so unrelated to Penn and Teller completely.
Oh, are you? Oh my gosh, I love both of those guys. I would love to meet them, and I think they're both brilliant as far as politics. And while I may not agree with everything, I just think they're brilliant. So. And I've heard
absolutely.
Who's the quiet guy? Is that Pat? That's which one is the
Teller? You wouldn't believe it, but he's so articulate and well spoken. He's got like this really powerful, kind of deep voice. It's kind of funny.
Is that right? Now I have heard him talk, and so that's why I was commenting on what he has said. And it just seems weird when you don't hear him talk for most of the time you've known him. But anyway, the hypocrisy of the environmental groups. Oh my gosh, can I start with one? we had a guy on the phone telling us what we should do. Now I want to be a good steward as much as I can be, okay? But he was telling me what to do. And then he was telling about Bono from U2. I like U2 and I like Bono. But the guy is preaching to us Americans about saving power, and he's under a million gazillion light bulbs.
Yeah.
He's flying around in an airplane. And I have a 60-watt light bulb on my desk, and it's all that I have on while I'm working at night. That's it. So there was my hypocrisy story.
You know, with some of these, I'm actually the guy who found Al Gore about 10 or 12 years ago now, uses, well, at the time, 21 times more electricity than the average American. Now, he spent millions of dollars doing a renovation to his house. You know, he did solar panels and geothermal heating and new insulation and all this stuff. And he's up to 34 times more electricity than the average person. So, I mean, to start off with this sort of example of hypocrisy, he's the worst person that the environmentalists or the greenies could have as a spokesman, as a sort of high priest, because he just doesn't walk what he walks, and he's the guy who's telling us to, you know, ride a bike or whatever, and he doesn't do it himself.
Wow, I didn't know those figures, but that just doesn't surprise me. One of the other things that gets to me, I don't know if this is in the category of hypocrisy, but is when we're being preached to as if we are the guilty parties, meaning Americans are the guilty parties. And what will always stop them in their tracks is I will say, isn't it worse in China? Isn't it worse in India? And then I'll say, oh, well, because I'm from New York. The Bronx River used to be a cesspool, and it should be a beautiful river. And guess what? They're making efforts to bring it back. So if, you know, New York used to have so much pollution, it doesn't really have a whole lot, at least not visible, maybe measurable, but not to the naked eye, it doesn't.
That's one of the really interesting good news stories that hasn't been covered. I think that the media really loves climate change and global warming talk because it's sort of, you know, people versus the earth and the future of humanity, and it's almost these kind of comic book kind of narratives, like the most extreme things we can talk about. But the real truth is, for America, our methane emissions are down 14% in the last 15 years. Our carbon emissions are down over a quarter in the last 20 years. So it's getting better literally every day. And a lot of the reason for it isn't crazy government regulations or intervention or, Kyoto or Paris, these sorts of summits and protocols. What it is really is that we discovered a lot of natural gas and sort of moved from coal-burning power plants to natural gas, and really this fracking revolution that's vilified and demonized by a lot of people on the left and in the environmental movement actually has made America a lot cleaner.
Yeah, we speak to a guy. He's an environmentalist, but he's also a fracking expert. He wrote a book called "Just the Fracks Man" or something like that. I can't remember his name, but anyway, I mean, he educates on this too. We had a guy on one time, and he was talking about how global warming is causing the oceans to rise, and there's an island in Chesapeake Bay that is currently going to be completely underwater before too long. And I looked it up, and sure enough, this island is going to be completely underwater. And I said to him, how come the other islands in Chesapeake Bay aren't sinking also? He didn't like that question. And it was like, well, maybe something else is happening. Because we go to the beach a lot here in Florida, and it looks the same as it always looked to me.
That's right. I think it's one of the really interesting things about the global warming debate is no matter what side you're on, the reason that people are so concerned today is that we have, $2 million houses right on the coastline. And 500 years ago, the climate was changing, but we were living in sticks and caves and stuff like that in a lot of places in North America in particular, and could just move our houses. So it's really interesting, sort of it's more the paradigm we're looking from, I think, than any historical changes.
And when we hear it's the hottest it's been in 12 years. And that's evidence. I'll go, well, what about 12 years ago?
Is there a movement to use some of the taxpayer dollars to install solar, like in the places like the Capitol and the White House and prominent places like that?
That's something that happens every year. There's some sort of push to force federal buildings to use renewables. One of the interesting things that we've seen is that under Obama, we were spending about $50 billion a year in renewables. And, of course, some of those things are very famous now for failing. So lenders, the example that we remember from 5 or 6 years ago where we wasted tens of billions of dollars and didn't get any benefit from it. But the fact of the matter is that the more money the federal government spends on renewables, the less good it does. It seems like when the marketplace sort of spurs this along, and we saw this with electric cars and Tesla now, the better off they are. And the fact of the matter is we're still decades away from a lot of that stuff being a reasonable thing for most people in America to use. We're at now in Nevada. There's a lot of solar because there's a lot of sun. Where you guys are, it might be feasible, but most places in America, because of you just can't store in batteries solar power in any effective manner right now. And so it really limits where you can use it and how useful it is. And so it's just really a waste of money. So like I mentioned before, what we should be doing is continuing to kind of celebrate how a lot of these fossil fuels and companies behind them have become more energy efficient and cleaner, and it's really going to bridge us to generations from now when renewables are a more feasible thing.
Can you help us understand, and if I'm throwing you a curve here, I don't intend to, but this is truly something I don't know that I understand. What is the ulterior motive? I actually don't believe that Al Gore is that passionate about the environment. If he was, then, like you say, he'd be living in very, very humble circumstances. So is there money to be made? I mean, what is the real behind-the-scenes reason?
It sort of depends on what group you're talking about, but for politicians, it really is, for a liberal or Democratic politician who believes that more government is the solution and that we should take power away from individuals and from companies, climate change is wonderful topic where you can say, if you trust government with more power, we'll save you in the future. And so it's a sort of a way to push, progressive and socialist ideas without saying it's about the economy, because they can say it's about the environment and saving the future and your grandkids and all that. So that's one ulterior motive that really, I've seen more and more kind of behind the scenes in D.C. The other one is with environmental groups. I mean, environmental groups are heavily invested, a lot of them, in fossil fuel companies. And so that they don't actually believe this stuff. They just sort of use these scare tactics to raise money. And so for, the Sierra Clubs and the groups like that, that's a example of hypocrisy that is just crazy. Is this, they're saying that we've got to stop using fossil fuels altogether. And if you look at their 990s and what they're invested in with their savings, I mean, a lot of them have fossil fuel investments.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. Well, like when when President Obama wanted to do away with coal, he levied taxes on them that would eventually have killed them. So I guess I have two questions about that. Did that work? Did that happen, or was it undone?
Quite a bit of it was actually undone by Trump and the Trump administration. One thing that's sort of interesting about coal is some of it has rebounded as a result of Trump and some of the things that he's done. But another thing that's really impacted coal is going back to what we were talking about before, this sort of fracking revolution, where fracking is actually cheaper than coal mining, and it produces cheaper electricity and cleaner electricity. So I think that's sort of a marketplace innovation that's hurt coal as well. And I'm from coal country in Appalachia, so it's sort of bittersweet, but it also has made things cheaper for lower income people as far as their energy bills and things like that. So there's certainly a sort of a silver lining to this kind of the fall off of coal.
Yeah. And we heard news stories about Russia trying to get their hands on to create pipelines where they would have the gas market.
Oh, in Europe, yeah.
Yeah, in Europe.
That's one of the most interesting things, if I could comment on that I've discovered in the last 3 or 4 years in my reporting and my policy work. I've gone to Russia a few times, and the Russian government, the Russian economy is completely dependent on natural gas and natural gas exports to stands into Central Europe and to Eastern Europe and places like Hungary and Baltic countries. And so a lot of the anti-fracking things that we see in America, actually, believe it or not, to these environmental groups are funded ultimately by Putin, by Russia, by the Kremlin, and they're able to shift money. I found at least $20 or $30 million in just ads and things like this that have come ultimately from the Kremlin, saying fracking is bad for the environment and saying things that frankly aren't true about earthquakes and groundwater and things that have been debunked. And these are being put out by American environmental groups, but ultimately the money is coming from Putin to try to stop fracking in America so that we don't get natural gas to the point that we can export it to these countries that Russia exports to.
Yeah. We were talking to somebody, I think they said Poland is the only country in Europe that gets a natural gas shipments from America. The rest of them get it all from Russia, I don't know how accurate that is, but it's interesting in that Germany, for example, will look to us to defend them from Russia if anything were to ever happen. And at the meantime, they're not buying natural gas from us.
That's exactly right. I mean, if they just stopped, countries like Germany and Italy and some of these countries that import a lot of Russian natural gas, stop doing that. It would just kill the Russian economy. So if that were, it's funny that the same people who talk about Russian collusion and Trump and the election are the same people who ultimately are sort of turning a blind eye when it comes to Russia's involvement with our energy policy.
Yeah. Can I go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, I'm switching topics a little bit, and I don't know if you want to go where I'm taking you right now, but I established in the beginning that I am not anti-environmentalist. I think we should all be good stewards, but I think there's a smart way, in a couple of different ways, in how to keep the environment clean, etc. I don't see anything wrong with using coal with filters. We had guys on here talked about filters on the smokestacks, and apparently they work, etc. Just different ways of doing things, but not so drastically that we completely disregard something that could be very useful. All right, but here's the direction I don't know if you want to go. Is there any hypocrisy in the statements that we hear about overfishing, over harvesting the fish? The oceans are gigantic, and I've often wondered if that's true, because I want to be behind it if it is. I mean, if we're really going to kill off all the whales or something, then my gosh, I don't think we should kill off the whales. But at the same time, there are complete populations of the world, up in Alaska, that depend on that for food. So is there any hypocrisy in that part of this?
I think from what I've been able to tell, and there's actually a group in Montana called PERC, P-E-R-C, that does a lot of really good work about free market environmental stuff, fisheries and habitat reclamation and things like that you can check out and learn more about that. But from what I've read just from their research, North America, Europe, most of the leading first world nations have done a really good job about protecting fish species and ensuring that more reproduce than are caught and things like that. The bigger issue, and this is the case whether it's overfishing or cutting down forests or whatever, the pollution in general, is that poor countries don't have the luxury to worry about clean water and clean air and not overfishing, because you're worried about feeding your kids. You're worried about keeping the lights on by literally cutting down the tree next door, making charcoal out of it, and using that for cooking and for heating and for light. Mm-hmm. So that's when environmentalists talk about stopping modernization, stopping industrialization, and basically building smokestacks in Africa and Southeast Asia, India, places like that. That's really the worst thing you could do for the environment, because when people reach a certain level of wealth where they know their kids aren't going to die and their kids are going to be fed, and there's medicine and things like that, that's when people care about the environment and want clean air and clean water for their kids and their grandkids. So that's the number one thing, after doing this for 10 or 15 years, that I've seen, that the more that we can encourage people to modernize, become richer, the better off the environment is.
And then we have those communities that try to take shortcuts, and then it's really detrimental to the citizens, like Detroit, with the lead in the pipes and everything. They didn't take the time to make sure that it was environmentally safe.
Yeah, like that's still a big problem when people don't do stuff right. I mean, there's still a lot of problems in America that need to be addressed, but and that's an example where a community basically had kind of bigger fish to fry with jobs and things like that, and sort of lost its way with some of the basic things to protect its citizens.
Your website is protectingtaxpayers.org. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So if people want to see sort of the dumb ways the government's spending their money, things that we're doing to help out, we're sort of a voice for taxpayers on Capitol Hill and DC. Everybody up there, obviously lobbyists, everybody wants more money from the government. We're sort of a voice up there for you, the taxpayers, to make sure that the government takes less money from your pocket and the money it does take is well spent.
This may not be an environmental question, but I have a question for you. We have right now a governor's race going on, and the Democratic candidate is currently the mayor of Tallahassee, our state capital. His name is Andrew Gillum, and I mean, aside from this issue, he's a nice guy, but I won't be voting for him because he wants to impose a 40% increase in taxes on corporations. And I've always felt like you can't really tax a corporation without affecting the end consumer. So ultimately, a tax on the corporation is a tax on the consumer. Correct me, disagree with me. What do you think about that what I just said and that whole thing?
You're exactly right. I mean, ultimately, corporations are just a bunch of people, and people have to pass the cost on of taxes to consumers by cutting jobs. I mean, if you're going to increase corporate taxes that much, especially in a state where people can move so easily to other states, and
right.
You know, in the Southeast, I'm from Tennessee. You can very easily go to another taxpayer-friendly or business-friendly state. You can go to Tennessee or Texas or Georgia or wherever. And so really what you're doing is killing jobs because people won't have as much money to pay workers. And you're also hurting poor people. That's what a lot of these liberal ideas from the environmental side or from the tax side end up doing, because what it's going to do is just raise the cost of products in Florida.
Right.
And if you make $300,000 a year, no big deal. But if you're making $30,000 or $40,000 a year or less, it really impacts your pocketbook.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our sister city of Gainesville, they just issued a press release yesterday that they're starting their 2-year study about how to be more environmentally friendly, starting with the public transportation and the buses up there, which is pretty amazing because they've got a great transportation system with buses for the public.
That's one thing that's really good news too. I think not only the increased awareness about the environment, but instead of government sort of coming along and saying, here's what we've got to have with fuel standards or with public transportation, so this is where I probably agree with the city a little bit, or disagree with the city a little bit. You know, a lot of companies that make buses or make fleet vehicles are realizing that consumers want more fuel-efficient cars, and so or buses or whatever the case is, so they're making hybrids and buses that run on natural gas and things like that. So it's really exciting that the marketplace is kind of reacting to the fact that consumers want to be environmentally conscious and sort of green friendly.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think things will work if people will use them. The whole high-speed rail argument is, I'm for it if people will use it. I don't see any reason why taxpayer money should pay for something that loses money. But if people will use it, if it can be self-supporting, why not? Drew, I love this conversation, and you're talking to the right audience. This audience is all about what you're talking about. You don't have a book, right? It's just the website.
You can actually read what I write at Newsmax and the Daily Caller. I'm a contributor both of those places, and I still write for Human Events from time to time. But yeah, check me out at Newsmax and Daily Caller, as well as Protecting Taxpayers.
Drew, it's an honor to have you on our show. Thank you so much for being on today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu.
Where is the place? I don't remember. How many years ago was it? I don't know.
The morning after President